Welcome everyone to Hiring Retention in the COVID-19 era and beyond, powered by ACDI and Great America Financial Services. I'm CJ Cannata of the Cannata Report, and I'm joined by our Editor-in-Chief, Scott Cullen, along with our esteemed guests, today's panelists, Paul Schwartz, President of Copier Careers, and Jessica Crowley, Copier Careers Business Development Manager. Paul and Jess will be discussing how the current labor market is impacting the dealer channel, and you all might be particularly surprised by some of the really fascinating details, data, and insights and information they have to share with us and all of you this afternoon. Thank you again for joining us. And with that said, I'll turn things over to Scott to get things officially started. Scott?
All right, thanks, CJ. Before we begin, please note we want to hear from you. We encourage you to submit questions throughout the webinar via the chat function, which is only visible to myself and CJ. We will do our best to work your questions in throughout the program. So Paul and Jess, why don't we get started? And I think the best way to start, especially since there may be folks joining us today who aren't familiar with Copier Careers, why don't you give us a brief introduction of Copier Careers and each of your backgrounds?
Thank you, Scott, and I'll do that. I want to take one moment of just personal preference, and I want to thank CJ and yourself for inviting us to do this. And I want to thank CJ and your family for the great legacy and all that you've donated and given to the Copier channel. We really appreciate it, and I know that our clients do, and it's been really important. And Scott, you're, of course, in our minds, you are the voice of the Copier channel, so we appreciate it. Now try to ask questions.
Humbly and respectfully, thank you very much. We appreciate that.
It's really heartfelt. So the background is that Copier Careers, we were a generic recruiting company. We started about 30 years ago, and by just luck of accidents, we ended up working on a retained basis for an OEM who needed technicians across the United States to service a large MIF of devices that they had, that they did not manufacture. And we took on this assignment, and we very rapidly discovered that the Copier channel was very interesting, and discovering and finding technicians was very challenging. But once we had their information, it was a very stable industry, and we started building a database to service this client. Became very successful with this client, and then we were made aware of the independent dealer channel. And we were fascinated by the channel, and we started working with independent dealers and no longer with that OEM. And independent dealers embraced our retained model to help them source and find OEM trained technicians. Over the next 5 years or so, that evolved, and we started recruiting, in addition to technicians, service managers, field service managers, sales representatives, sales managers, back office people, and ultimately C-level executives, all within the industry and within the channel. We maintain a very sophisticated database of these individuals within our organization. And as I mentioned the other day in our conversation, we're tracking about a little over 102,000 people in this industry that we benchmark and we track. So that's a little bit of the quick history of Copier Careers.
Mm-hmm. And my background, I graduated from a small school in Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin Stout. First position out of the Copier channel, or out of school, was within the industry. I sold consumable copier parts and supplies to dealers across the US. Did that for a few years, left the industry, and then a prior colleague from that first position reached out asking if I was actually looking for a new position. I ironically was at the time. Interviewed with Paul for quite some time, and found that it really clicked. He would ask, if I remembered some of my clients. I did, and so then it just, I had no recruiting background, but it just made sense to move forward. And been with Paul and Copier Careers. End of next month, it'll be 10 years. So.
Excellent.
That's great, Jess. It's very difficult to leave the industry and not come back. They don't
Yeah,
people
exactly.
don't let you go.
I did when I left the industry, I said, oh, I don't think I'll ever come back. But I got pulled in, and I don't think I'm going anywhere, that's for sure.
All right, well, let's get into the meat of the webinar here. So why don't we start talking about the current state of the labor market in the copier industry? And Paul and Jess, I'll let you go back and forth like you've got a tennis ball as far as responding to these questions.
Well, I appreciate that, Scott. You know, I'll start off with all the recruiters and staff back at the office told me there are 4 terms that I can't use because they're overused, but they're appropriate here, and it's unprecedented, accelerate, pivot, and disruption, and opportunity. And those are the things that we are seeing generically in the market. And I think, Jess, I'll let you get a little more focus on specifically what we're seeing in the market, but I did manage to work in the 4 terms for everyone back at the office.
No, I think what we're seeing in the market, if you would have asked me back in March or April, it's a completely different story. I was rightfully so, had quite a few candidates reach out to me, and then trying to get our clients to at least engage in conversations, knowing that this is going to pass and that they are going to want to talk to these individuals. And so I would say for the end of March through April and even into May, having still some of that hesitation on our clients' end, but then I would say over the past 6 to 8 weeks, it's dramatically changed as far as the number of clients that are coming to us with active job orders with our current clients, as well as potential new clients inquiring about our services and trying to find the right individuals as they start to open up and have been in order to find the right person.
So Paul, I'm curious, since you've been around a little longer than Jess, by a year or 2, are there many parallels between 2009 and the economic meltdown and what we're seeing today?
It's very interesting, and Jess came to us just at kind of the end of the meltdown, or about the middle of the meltdown. So she can comment on it too, but it's very interesting. It is eerily familiar to the meltdown of 2009, 10, that period. The only thing is, use one of the words, it's greatly accelerated. So, you know, we saw things fall off a cliff very rapidly in February, March, April, and then we've seen things rebound. So we saw, dramatic numbers of people furloughed and laid off, and then we're seeing them come back just as dramatically. So, I think the interesting thing generically about the copier channel and employment within the copier channel, prior to COVID, we were at what we consider 0 unemployment in the copier channel. I mean, there was no such thing as an unemployed copier technician or sales rep or manager. So all of a sudden, we saw a little bit of that. Now what we're seeing is, I believe, we're seeing a little bit of a generational shift. So we're seeing some individuals that are not going to return back into the market. We're seeing that among some senior leadership individuals, where I think they've said to themselves, I went through 2001, I went through 2009, this one, next generation, you manage us through that one. We're seeing it with some technicians, we're seeing it with some sales reps, because things are going to look different on the other side, and they're going to have to adapt to some new skill sets to be successful. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to come out with even less than a 0 unemployment rate when we come through the other side of this.
Yeah, and I think, something that I noticed, or, starting at the end of 2010 is when I first started recruiting, and the candidates that were still out there looking for jobs, there weren't really anyone that I would say was furloughed. It was true layoffs, and they were actively looking, and they probably weren't necessarily transitioning over to the solution side of the industry. So unfortunately, that was probably why they were laid off. Now it's such a combination of candidates that are either furloughed with an anticipated date to go back, furloughed without a date to go back, and then laid off candidates, as well as candidates that are currently employed and really wanting to know where things are at and where the industry is at, so they're inquiring.
I'm curious, based on what you just shared, Jess, are there still opportunities for folks that don't have that solutions experience and probably never will?
Honestly, not really. You know, especially in this time, I would say that the individuals that come to us, if we suggest to them, if you want to move forward, this is what you'll have to do, especially in such a tight hiring market right now, and even, you know, once things become even more greater, they're just going to continue to get put on the back burner. So people really do need to evolve and focus on where the industry is going, and even how it's changed from when pre-pandemic to where things are at now, and how companies have evolved in what they're offering and what they're focusing on with their services.
A thing I would add really quickly, Scott, is too that there are many of the skill sets from the channel, whether it's on the technical side, the sales side, or the administrative side. And we're joking about the industry brings you back in, but we are seeing during people that are being laid off or furloughed, and they are looking at opportunities outside of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
There are skill sets that easily cross over. So again, you know, we're concerned about what does the inventory, if you will, of candidates look like on the other side. And we're concerned that it's going to be short.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about the hierarchy or the types of positions that dealers are looking to fill right now. I know we're talking service, we're talking administrative, we're talking sales. Is there any of, you know, among that group or other positions that you tend to fill, any kind of ranking, like more dealers are looking for service techs at this point versus sales reps, or any rhyme or reason to what's happening as far as what your clients really want to fill, positions they want to fill at this point?
I think what we're seeing right now is because there are candidates, especially at maybe a higher level, that are willing to have conversations. Companies are really evolving and trying to find ways to make it work for the organizations. I've connected with a number of people, or know of a number of people that have left one company and really excelled in their position by moving over to, let's say, a smaller company with a greater responsibility. We honestly have been searching, you know, for technicians, sales reps, CFOs, VP of sales, VP of service. Obviously, within an organization, you have more sales and more technicians, so therefore the clients are asking for that. But I think just because they know that there may be candidates that may have not necessarily been available prior to the pandemic, they're at least open to having discussions to see what they can make it work with the individual.
And just another, as a follow-up to that, are there any particular very, very niche or specific areas, like say IT, document management, production print, as just a few examples, subject matter experts per se, that you find you're really getting more inquiries versus others? I think that would be interesting to our audience.
Well, I think, let me just start, just go a little big picture, and then you can fill in a little more of the micro.
Sure.
What you know, one thing that we're seeing during this period is, so we represent about 400 independent dealerships on retained basis. So what we are providing to our clients, and they are receptive to, you know, everyone can use, you know, has 1 week sales rep that they want to replace, or 1 technician that they want to replace, and Jess can get into the nuance of it, or, you know, middle management or senior management or leadership. So we're seeing a lot of that evolve in this situation. We're seeing candidates that are getting reflective about where their careers are at, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, that maybe don't understand where their organization is going to, or have not been communicating with their organization where they're going to. So we're seeing those positions generically. We're presenting those candidates on a proactive basis to our clients, and they are very receptive to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, you know, when it comes to more specialized positions, we are seeing that in some markets where, let's say the Upper East Coast, where a lot of companies are really still running at minimum. I have a client in Long Island that is taking a look at the potential candidate pool and looking for a managed IT sales rep. So those types of positions are available, I would say, in markets where they're a little bit more, I don't want to say shut down, but a little bit more on, you know, trying to be conservative and focus on bringing back either the technicians or sales reps that are furloughed. If they had something prior to the pandemic that they were actively looking for and just having a struggle trying to find that individual, knowing that people with that skill set might be a little bit more open to having a discussion, that's where they're contacting us and having us focus on that.
Sure, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's back up to pre-pandemic times. And I know as you've been sharing, sales reps and sales service techs are high priority. What's the most common reason a sales rep would want to take a new job pre-pandemic? And the reason I'm asking this is because often these people have built up a pretty good book of business, and when they move it elsewhere, that base tends to stay with their former employer.
I think, you know, one of the main reasons why a successful sales individual is going to be open to making a move prior to the pandemic, you know, when it comes to compensation as well as their territory or their client base, if something changes and happens with that, where there is either an overall quota increase but a decrease in compensation, so you have to sell above what the quota is to at least make even of where you were at prior to, that's what might cause an individual that was successful or that is successful prior to pandemic. Leadership change, company culture has become a significant part of a reason why an individual is open to making a move. And then other external factors, something going on in their family, personal life that causes them to consider a new position.
And related to that, are all the acquisitions that have been taking place impacting the talent pool out there?
Yes, I would say of some of the, if what I have seen, it doesn't happen immediately. Typically with a sales rep, they want to see and feel it through, but after a certain number of months or, you know, possibly even some weeks, getting an understanding of the direction of the company, the new company, having an idea of how it's going to affect, you know, their territory. If there's another person from the other company that's, you know, from the acquisition, are you trying to go after the same accounts? A number of different scenarios would cause them to then be open to making a move. And a lot of times it's because there's just not a clear vision for them as well as the company of what they're doing.
So one of the things, I know you do a lot of, you have your salary surveys and you also do a lot of polls, and those I think you do in your newsletters. So one of the things that jumped out at me in a fairly recent poll was that only 57.5% of copier industry employees or workers who were unemployed in July were actively job hunting at the time. Why do you think that is? And has it changed much from July to September 24th?
So you're right, Scott. So we do, and on our website, you can see the results. We do a poll of the month, and we'll average anywhere from 8 to been getting 16, 17,000 responses a month during the pandemic. What you're referring to is one poll that was, I believe, in July, and we did see a significant percentage of the people that respond to us said they were not actively searching. So we're not 100% certain how to interpret this. If it was people that were furloughed and felt comfortable, they would have something to go back to during that period of time. But also that was a point in time, and we've seen a significant, anecdotally, we've seen a significant change in that since July, and every month everything seems to be changing. So to go back to my original list of words, you know, we see an acceleration of everything that's happening, and it's happening very quickly. So I don't think that number is probably relevant in you know, September, October, as it was back in July. We're not seeing it. We're seeing them actively engaged in the marketplace.
Yeah, and what else I'm seeing actively engaged, and also really open to having discussions, but knowing that they have other options as well. So if a client isn't responsive, you know, within a, you know, a certain period of time frame, they're not going to wait around. As well as not going to, you know, whether they were laid off or furloughed or currently employed, they're not going to, you know, compensation wise take something less because they're in this era. They're really focused on finding the next step in their career.
And the other thing to recall, Scott, is that back in you know, May, June, you know, if they were unemployed or they were furloughed or laid off, you know, they were receiving additional incentives from the federal government to be at home. So those are gone now. So I think there's an economic squeeze that they want to get back into the marketplace. You know, plus clients are actively looking now and putting, you know, obviously putting much more than putting their toe back in the water, they're putting their foot back in the water, and they're looking for skilled, talented people.
Mm-hmm.
So any other surprising findings or interesting findings from recent polls that you could share with us? Or, and again, you do these all the time and your response rate is through the roof.
I think the thing that has surprised Jess, myself, and everyone at the office is just during everything how positive the responses have been. That, you know, we didn't get an overwhelming number of individuals, depending what the question was. It's kind of tailored to what's topical that month. We never got any overwhelming, disastrous, oh my God, the industry's over, the channel's done, it's coming to an end. We had some of that, but not in overwhelming numbers, and it was overwhelming positive responses of, we're going to get through this, we're going to get through this together, the channel's going to evolve, but we'll come back out of this and it's all going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
We're very surprised by that.
Yeah.
And I might add, we are seeing, and this is a little bit of a spoiler alert for part 2 of our 35th annual survey, we have a question about optimism, and we are seeing the same exact thing in our survey. And that's very refreshing to see. And hopefully it continues into next year.
Yes.
So the other thing I was wondering about is, how is age being impacted, different age groups being impacted by what's happening as far as who's looking for work, who's thinking about moving on, who's willing to listen to you? Is there any difference between millennials, say, and folks who have been in the industry for 30 plus years?
Well, I'll just interject, and I alluded to it before. I think we're going to go through a generational shift. I alluded to that before, just like we did after 2009, just like we did after, you know, from analog to digital. That was another bellwether moment in the channel. And I think, Jess, you can speak more specifically about, you know, what you're seeing day to day.
Yeah, I think it really does depend on the company that they're coming from. We saw a pretty significant number of candidates from one of the direct manufacturers that did a pretty extensive layoff, and it was based off of tenure within the company, that they took that early retirement but still wanted to work, and still, you know, not at anywhere near the age of true retirement. So we've seen that, but then I've come across candidates that I had reached out to 6 months prior that were actively looking at the time, and I've reached out to them, and they're like, you know what, I've worked out the numbers with my financial advisor, and they said that I can retire if I wanted to. So we're seeing that. When it comes to the millennials, I would say I spoke with an individual yesterday, and she had just graduated from college in the spring, and I said, well, what has the search been? And she's like, it was minimal, absolutely minimal in May, June, but she's like, over the past month, I've had a significant number of interviews. And so that's where we're seeing, not just for millennials, we're seeing right now, if companies are looking to hire, they need to move quickly. Going back to compare it to the recession, I think it was a lot, it obviously was a lot slower transition, so companies could really take their time in bringing on the right person. I'm not saying that you have to rush to make decisions, but if you want the right individuals, they're not going to be around much longer.
And Scott, if I may, this may be a good time, applicable time to interject, following somewhat related question. You did talk a little bit about the Northeast and some of the different types of activity there. What else, if anything, can you share with us about any correlation between the types of activity that you're seeing with regard to hiring and retention of talent regionally, like North compared to South, Midwest, and the West? And one of the reasons I'm asking those questions is that's an ongoing dialogue that I'm having a lot with dealers and also a lot of our vendor partners as well. For example, I'm hearing that the South is experiencing an uptick. Wondering if in your eyes that's valid, along with the rest of what I put forward.
Mm-hmm. I would say the Northeast is probably the least amount of activity that I've seen. And like I mentioned, there are very specific types of roles that I'm seeking and have been seeking even before the pandemic. Where we've seen activity grow, even being actively making hiring has from the beginning has been down in Florida. Carolinas have picked up tremendously. Texas is another market that we've seen quite a bit of increase. California, all throughout Northern and Southern California, significant amount of activity that we've seen with their clients. The Washington, Idaho, Utah, that market, we have some specific positions, sales technicians, sales managers. Midwest, just got a job order for a technician. That's a little bit lighter on the activity. Still a little bit hesitant to move forward, maybe in some more rural markets than the cities. And then it just, overall, I would say, like you had mentioned, the South has been pretty active from day one. And then California, surprisingly, as well.
So are people willing, or job candidates willing to make a regional move during this time?
Yes, yeah. We have, depending on the position, and depending on their personal life. If they have significant others, children, that is another story. But if they are relocating on their own, this is a time where they're actually reflecting and saying, you know what, hey, I do want to make a transition. I want to move from the cold climate to the southern climate, or I, have family over on, even from one state to the next. So it's a lot of reflection, especially if they've been part of that either furlough or layoff. It gives them an opportunity to really figure out what's going to be best for them or for them and their family. So we've quite a few candidates have inquired saying that they're open for relocation.
So it sounds like there's a fair amount of candidates available. I'm wondering, do your clients who are doing the hiring, do they have any, or have they expressed any interest to you or made any comments that, well, there's so many people available, I don't necessarily have to pay market value for this position or that position anymore because folks are desperate? Mm-hmm. And maybe that's a total misconception on their part, but What are you seeing, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's a misconception on their part. We are not seeing overall. There's some individual circumstances, but overall we are not seeing candidates that are willing to go backwards in their compensation. They want to be at a minimum where they're currently at, or possibly a little bit better. And there's a value, and they realize there's a value in the service that they provide to the company, and they're going to stick to that value, and they're going to demand that value. And in our experience day to day, they're receiving that value. And individuals that are offered less than what they perceive reasonably as their market value, they're not accepting the offers.
Mm-hmm. And where we've seen where candidates are open for a little bit less in compensation is maybe a little bit less in responsibility, or the position is changed a little bit. Like for leadership, if they're open to getting back out in the field, or a sales rep, if they're like, what, at this point I really want to focus on my production and getting compensated based off of that, they may be willing to take a little bit less in compensation in order to do so.
So earlier on, Paul, you were talking.
You go first.
Go ahead, CJ. I'll let you interject.
Okay. I thought this might be a good time to ask a little bit about the quote-unquote remote workforce, and ask you take a step back and ask a general question. What are your feelings, thoughts, has your experience been in talking with dealers throughout, let's say since the beginning of March, in terms of their feelings about remote workers? Are you seeing a definitive increase that you think will be permanent? Are you seeing a lot, or are you anticipating or seeing a lot of dealers looking to revert back to norms, somewhere in between, or something else? What would you, anything you have to share on that topic, I think would be interesting to our mutual audience.
I think, CJ, I think we're seeing all the above. So I think we're seeing some clients, and it goes very much, I think, regionally. I think some clients are saying, we understand this is going to be, work from home for a while, or different ways to approach things, or new way to approach things. And we've seen, especially the independent dealer channel is very adaptive and very resilient, and have found ways to do that. And that may be something that they end up sticking with. We hear from a lot of our clients that they are very anxious to they're either back in their offices, or they want to be back in their offices, and they're going to be based that way. So, I think that we're seeing all the above, and I think it's to be determined where it totally ends up.
Sure, I think that's a very fair statement.
And I'll interject too that I think also that you can take it one level lower and say, what are the clients of our clients doing? So what are the businesses that our clients are servicing? Where are they at? And it's very interesting, because it's very reflective. So if they're now supporting at-home workforces, which our overall indication is that's not working out as well as everyone thought it would, and people are anxious.
Oh, I think he froze up a little.
Yes, Paul did freeze, but I'm sure he'll be back with us shortly. But Des, you could cover for him if he remains in that position for the remainder of the webinar.
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, let's so Jess, Paul was referencing talking to senior folks and dealer owners, senior management, who might be thinking about moving on and turning things over to the next generation to deal with the rest of this and what comes next. To use Paul's word, anecdotally, are there any ways you could describe the types of dealerships who might be sharing that type of information with you? Are they family-owned dealerships? Are they larger? Are they smaller? Paul, I think, signed out, and hopefully will be coming back.
Yeah. We have spoken with some of our clients that are kind of in that transition point. I worked with a client that told me that he was looking for an individual to come on board with a sales leadership position, and then the next 2 to 5 years he is going to eventually hand that dealership over to them. So we've seen that happen. We've also talked to candidates that have been in a situation where they were actively looking, and for various reasons our clients couldn't move forward, so then they ended up finding those types of positions available. It really does depend on the market, but I do see that the smaller dealers are making those types of transitions a little bit smoother during this time frame.
So Jess, what advice do you have for dealers and others in dealer organizations who are tasked with hiring and recruiting as we start to come out of the darkest days of the pandemic? Hopefully we're almost there now, but
yeah,
kind of have a feeling we're going to be struggling with this for a few more months.
I think the biggest thing that I can suggest to clients is being open for communication. Even though there is thousands of people being unemployed right now, there are also candidates that are currently employed that are really taking a look at their current situation and how the company has evolved. And if they feel that they could move towards a company that has been thriving and pushing forward, they're going to be open for discussion. As long as the client's open to communicate, I think it's going to be beneficial. Whether it's right now or in the future, it doesn't hurt to at least have a discussion and see if it makes sense at the time to move forward or keep in touch over the next number of months or years.
And what advice do you have for job candidates?
Same thing, be open for communication. I had a candidate that I spoke with up in Pennsylvania that I reached out to, and she's like, I had tried for years before to communicate, and she actually responded to a message I sent her. And she's like, honestly, I just wanted to see where things are at. I'm furloughed. I've been with my company for 10 years. I'm loyal to them, but I don't, to us, we feel that everything is still shut down and everyone's working remotely. And I said, honestly, I'm calling you because I have a client that's looking to hire, and they're looking to hire right now. So you never know what's available until you're going out there and putting yourself out there and seeing what's available at this time.
And I had a conversation with you and Paul a few weeks ago, and one of the things you shared with me that there's a fair amount of folks who have been furloughed who have not heard from their employers and have no idea what's going on. What do you think the impact of that is? How pervasive is that?
It's been, fortunately to us, it's been an advantage to us because then those candidates are open for discussion. Just the other day, I was speaking with a candidate that was furloughed in March and hadn't heard from his direct manager one time. I said, well, why are you just now actively searching? He's like, well, I've been with the company for quite some time. So I think, what you're saying, that 57%, back in July, I've seen a lot of candidates that were in that situation where they were furloughed, they're loyal to their companies, they want to make a transition. And there's also the fear, if they go to a new company, if another spike hits, are they going to be the ones to be laid off and not just furloughed? And so, but now if there's no end in sight, or it's off until next year when they're saying that they want to bring them back, now they're going to be open for discussion and open to making a move.
This is somewhat related to my earlier question about SMEs and types of roles that are more non-traditional or not as related to the core business of which to us is defined by the sale and service of A3 and A4 MFPs. And that is, are you finding that finding that you're having to go outside of your existing database a little bit to maybe accommodate some requests, and or do you anticipate growing your database or potentially seeing a need to not necessarily look outside of your database? I know you have an extensive database, but are you seeing a trend where you think you are looking or will be looking a little bit more beyond a role that's traditionally associated with a dealership, for example?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to, let's say, a dedicated IT technician or someone that is specifically related to managed IT, prior to this, we have been doing some active searches for our clients. So we have been kind of targeting those types of accounts. When it comes to sales individuals, if they're looking for a regular up and down the street rep, I do have clients that are open to parallel industries. Companies like WB Mason, or I have a client said that, he's had success with finding individuals that have sold transportation sales, logistics, things like that. But for the most part, if companies are willing to hire and, what they've transitioned to or what they have added on to their organization during this time, the technicians or sales or, whatever the position is, have, been open to adapting to that as well.
I'm not quite sure I know the answer to this one. Are you finding it difficult to recruit fresh talent into this industry? For example, as folks are exiting the business, how are you able to get outsiders excited about working in the document solution space? Or do you exclusively work with your database of industry folk?
Well, typically our clients request us to go after industry experienced candidates. The companies that are open for outside the industry, it really depends. If it's on the sales side, some of the parallel industries tend to compensate a little bit more heavy on the base salary. But even though the commission plan is going to be greater if they transition over. So that's a little challenging to do that and transition over. On the technical side, honestly, there's not too many clients that are looking for non-industry technicians, whether it's IT related or Copier, break fix related. But with that being said, I do have a client that is open for more entry level. So I have been going after, either recent college grads and individuals that have maybe 1 to 2 years of account management. And for the most part, it's been perceptive outside of that compensation is the number one factor, the reason why they wouldn't take a position.
So in the Northwest portion of the country, on the technical side, not sales, how are dealers doing? Are there many layoffs? Are they still laying off, or has it leveled off?
Northwest, we've actually had some active job orders with our clients up in the Northwest. I know there's been some acquisitions as well. So companies have been actively looking to recruit, as well as, find ways to increase their market share. But, it depends. Some of the larger cities have been still affected, so not as many companies are actively looking right now.
Okay. This is a personal message for you, Jess. Somebody's going to want to contact you to set up a virtual meeting. So that's a good thing. There is another interesting question here. And again, it really is more of a nuts in. Well, okay, well, let me go to this other question first. What opportunities are you seeing for managed print services?
Well, I mean, I do have an MPS provider, a dedicated MPS provider that's looking up in the Boston area. So, I have one client that is actively looking for that, but, so I have some hesitation from the sales reps, just wondering, if people aren't in the office, how are they doing MPS? With that being said, I know as markets start to increase and open up, I think my personal feeling is that if companies, larger entities such as massive corporations aren't coming back until after the new year, I think that will still slowly evolve. but you know, I don't think it's going away whatsoever.
Okay. And we are pretty much out of most of the questions that I think I can ask. I think there was one for Paul, and that was a little more specific as to your business model and how you might adjust that to certain dealers who are financially stressed. Okay, here's another question that just came in.
Okay.
Typically, dealers furlough or lay off their least strongest technicians that probably end up in your pool. How do you guys weed out the bad ones?
Well, here's the thing. When it comes to that is a good question, because I know we talked about that the other day as well. So what I found with furloughing, some candidates that were furloughed are probably at the top of their game, but they're financially being tied to the company, as far as, if the company needs money, they furlough some of their top people. And I've had this happen with a couple individuals. So by really trying to find out and question, where is your territory? If you were measured on call numbers a day, or was your percentage of callbacks, things like that, to get an understanding of how productive they were, or if they've been frustrated because the company hasn't really measured their territory right, to figure out where they're being at. That's where, for one person, it might not be the best fit, but for another company, that's exactly what they're looking for, is someone to really come in and focus on customer service and bring in the value that they need.
To be the last question from the audience, though, you and Paul will be available via email, and we could provide that information after as we wind down. Have you seen much transition in sales management during COVID? We're not looking to hire service techs at this time, but hopefully in the near future. So I kind of read the end of that question first.
Okay, so they're asking about seeing
Sales management.
People looking for sales management companies.
There's much transition going on in those positions.
Yeah, there is. We're actually looking for quite a few sales leaders throughout the U.S., even a regional VP of sales. And it all ties into companies and how open they are to having conversations with individuals that are looking to. There you are, Paul.
Welcome back.
That's fine.
We don't need you, Paul. Jess is doing fabulous.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, I'm sure.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jess.
Sorry,
No,
Jess.
that's okay. I was just saying that we have quite a few companies that are looking for additional leadership, because they are taking a look at where they could improve, and if they aren't seeing or weren't necessarily seeing the best performance, or know that there's candidates out there that may be at a level that they can bring them on. So it's all about being open for communication.
So we are just about out of time. Paul, sorry we lost you, and sorry it took so long to get you back. We're doing okay.
We're fine. No, Jess does fine. I'm not the least bit concerned.
But yeah, to Scott's point, Scott, correct me if I articulate this incorrectly, but any questions that we directed towards you, or any, we'll be sure to connect with both Jess and Paul, and Scott will put out some editorial or connect you or make sure that your questions are answered. Is that fair statement, Scott?
So, right. Final question. Any final thoughts on hiring and recruiting post-pandemic? Paul, Jess has talked out. Why don't you answer this one, and then CJ could wrap things up.
Well, hopefully I won't contradict her. I think the thing that I was just about to go into, whatever stage of pandemic that we're in, and post-pandemic, is there's opportunity out there for dealers to grow their dealerships. We saw an acquisition happen, a significant acquisition happen earlier this week, but I don't know that we're going to see a lot of acquisitions, but I think we're going to see dealers grow by being able to acquire talented, skilled individuals to grow their dealerships. And this is a way to do it, and maybe to do it without all the overhead. So I think we're going to see a significant change that way, and dealerships growing organically, as this channel has always done, because they're able to recruit good individuals to grow their businesses. And I think that's what we're going to see, what we're seeing it happen now, and we're going to see it happen more as those individuals are now available and open to look at opportunities that they previously would not have.
Okay, so Paul and Jess, if folks listening today want to get in touch with you, send you an email, why don't you share those email addresses if you don't mind, or if you've got some other preferred method of communication?
Go ahead, Jess.
Mine is Jessica, Jessica at copiercareers.com is my email.
And I'm very simply Paul, Paul, at copiercareers.com. Or feel free to just go to copiercareers.com, and we've got numerous places you can send us information or requests for information, and we'd be happy to get it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Jessica. I'll keep this wrap up brief because we are a little bit over time. First of all, most importantly, thanks to all the members of the audience, most of which have stayed with us throughout this entire discussion. I hope that you all found it illuminating, that there's a lot of activity and different types of activity going on with regard to hiring and retention throughout the country in different regions and so on and so forth. So thank you, Paul. And thank you, Jess. As I neglected to mention earlier, Jess is also one of our first young influencers, excuse me, for those of you who are familiar with that franchise, which is fairly popular. So great to have you both. Jess and Paul have already given you their contact information, so I can skip right over that and just say the CannataReport.com is also full of a broad array of content and information for those of you looking for additional information about our industry.